Hey, what's up guys? Joker here. Today we're going to be taking a look at our first custom variant of the NVIDIA RTX 2070 with the Gigabyte Gaming OC card, and this is the white version of the card. It is currently retailing over on Amazon for $550, and I'm going to be comparing that directly up against the NVIDIA Founders Edition card, which many of you probably know retails for $600. So this card is actually cheaper than the Founders Edition card, and there are some out there that you can even get for $500. And in fact, there's actually a version of this card you can get, which is the non-OC version. There's currently 3 versions available. They have the non-OC version for $500. They've got this one for $550, and then they have a black version of the OC card as well for $550, which aesthetically looks exactly the same as the $500 card. You're just getting a better factory overclock on the white and OC version of the black card. All of the Gigabyte RTX 2070s do feature Rgb lighting on the Gigabyte branding on the side of the card, which you can go ahead and customize within their software. You could turn it off completely. You could set it to a single static color or to cycle between colors, and a couple other options in there as well by using their RGB Fusion software. So you can definitely do that with the Gigabyte RTX 2070, but that is something you cannot do on the Founders card. On there, you're just limited to having a green LED, or you can go ahead and turn it off if you wanted to. There are some other key differences here between the Gigabyte RTX 2070 and the Founders Edition card. For starters, this has a triple fan heatsink versus the Founders Edition, which is obviously just running 2 fans, so that should help us a little bit with cooling. We'll get into the cooling performance in just a little bit. There is also an extra power connector on the Gigabyte card, so it has an 8-pin and a 6-pin, although it still has the same TDP of 175 watts, but if you wanted to, you can deliver a little bit of extra power to this card. In MSI Afterburner, for instance, you can push it up to 130% power delivery versus the maximum of 116 on the Founders Edition card. However, both of these are running the same base clock, but the boost clock is different here, with the Gigabyte having a higher boost clock of 1725 megahertz, while the Founders Edition card boosts up to 1710 megahertz. So for someone that doesn't want to get into overclocking, both of these cards will be clocked pretty high right out of the box, over 1900 megahertz in fact, because this time around with even the Founders Edition cards, they are heavily overclocked compared to what should be a base model reference PCB card. And speaking of the PCB, the Gigabyte card is not using a reference PCB, and it's actually considerably longer than the one on the Founders card, and it extends the full length of the cooler, which comes in at 11 inches versus the Founders card, which is just a tad over 9 inches. The rear I/O on the Gigabyte 2070 is actually quite different as well compared to the Founders card. They are going more towards what we saw on the 2080 and 2080 Ti cards and ditching the DVI connector in favor of an extra DisplayPort, giving you a total of 3 DisplayPort connectors, 1 HDMI, as well as the 1 USB Type-C, which we've seen on all RTX cards thus far. Now, for all of my testing, I was running at stock settings on both of these cards because the overclocking headroom for both of them is honestly about the same. You're going to be able to get these anywhere from 2050 to 2100 megahertz, depending on how GPU boost is working and what game you happen to be playing. So there's really not a ton of extra overclocking headroom with the Gigabyte card, but it is clocked higher out of the box by just a little bit. So yeah, overclocking on both of these cards should not be an issue. Really, one of the main differences you're going to see here besides aesthetics is going to be the cooling on the card. So I did want to run a 30-minute burn-in test on the F1 2018 benchmark, and just for reference, both of these cards were tested inside of the same system along with a 9900K, which is running at 5 gigahertz and 1.25 volts, and 16 gigabytes of G.Skill Trident Z RAM at 3200 megahertz, and they were running on the same driver, 416.64. So I did run the burn-in test here, and this is inside of a closed system. It's in the Be Quiet Dark Base 801, my recent Frame Raider build that I featured on the channel. So completely closed case, tempered glass side panel on it, and I just let both of these cards run for 30 minutes on F1 2018. And the stats that we were able to pull from this is that at the start of the benchmark run, The Gigabyte 2070 OC was running at 1935 megahertz, while the Founders Edition card was running at 1905 megahertz, and both of them were running at 62 degrees Celsius when the benchmark ran. At the end of the benchmark, they actually both lost the same amount of frequency, so they both dropped down by 15 megahertz, while the Gigabyte was running at 1920 megahertz at that point, and the Founders Edition card dropped down to 1890 megahertz, and there was a 2-degree difference in temperature, with the Gigabyte card running cooler at 69 degrees Celsius versus the 71 degrees Celsius of the NVIDIA Founders Edition. So that's really what you can look forward to if you do pick up something like the Gigabyte card with a triple fan heatsink. It's going to run about 2 degrees cooler than a Founders Edition card, and that's, I think, speaks a lot to how much better the Founders Edition cards are around this time versus in previous generations where they were running blower-style coolers. So the Founders card is actually quite good at being able to stay cool, but the Gigabyte card is a little bit better, as you would expect, as it is running a triple fan heatsink versus a dual fan heatsink. And as you would expect, the performance between these two cards is virtually identical, with the Gigabyte card edging out in pretty much every single game by just a couple of frames, which is really what you should expect, as both of these are RTX 2070 cards. I've already tested the 2070 up against the likes of the 1080, the Vega 64, as well as the RTX 2080 in previous videos. So this is really just a comparison between the Gigabyte custom card versus the Founders Edition, and since the Gigabyte card does have a very slight out-of-the-box overclock, you can expect it to run games just that much better than the Founders Edition card, but it's really not a ton. But, you know, at the end of the day, this card is actually $50 cheaper, and there's a non-OC version which is a full $100 cheaper than the Founders Edition card, and you could easily take that $500 2070 and throw on an extra like 1 to 200 megahertz possibly, and, you know, see it matching what the Founders Edition card is doing here, and even go beyond that and be able to hit an overclock over 2 gigahertz. So you really shouldn't have any worries about, you know, which card you really go with, as both of them were running pretty identically in terms of cooling, with the 2070 just edging it out a little bit. I guess you would really want to go for the Gigabyte card if you don't want to do any manual overclocking, in which case you'd probably want to get the OC version versus the base model, but that is going to be $50 more. And then, you know, another thing you can kind of weigh between the two is aesthetics, you know, based on your preference, build quality, and all of that. Obviously, this card that I'm testing is white, so that is definitely going to fill a certain niche as far as aesthetics are concerned if you're trying to do an all-white or maybe a monochrome build out there. Now, we'll go ahead and throw up the average FPS and the 1% lows now. We'll start off at 1440p, and then we'll go into 1080p. And as I said, you know, both of these cards running within just a couple of frames of each other, in some cases running identical frame rates. One game that I did see run just a touch better on the Founders Edition card was Gears of War 4. That actually ran a little bit better on that card, as well as Call of Duty Black Ops 4, but not a crazy amount, but it was just running a touch better on the Founders Edition card. And both of these cards, as they're both 2070s, very good for 1440p gaming. This was at ultra settings in some instances, like Assassin's Creed Odyssey, which can be really taxing. That's a game you might want to play down at high settings, but ultra and a lot of the other demanding titles here is not going to be an issue. I'll go ahead and put up the 1% lows now, where you can see there were a couple games coming down below 60 frames per second. Some of the really taxing recent titles like Shadow of the Tomb Raider, again, Assassin's Creed Odyssey, but this was ultra settings, so once again, drop it down to like high settings, maybe remove those volumetric clouds from Assassin's Creed Odyssey, and you should be smooth sailing even at 1440p. And we'll go ahead and quickly throw up 1080p, average FPS, and then the 1% lows. If you want to go back and pause and look at those, then you can definitely go ahead and sort through those one at a time. But that's all we've got here today for the Gigabyte RTX 2070 Gaming OC card in the white version. If you do decide to pick up the black version, they are the same exact price, same specs. The only difference really is the color of the cooler and the backplate on those cards, so yeah, you really shouldn't have any worries about that. And as I said, there's a $500 version which doesn't have an out-of-the-box overclock, and then of course there's Founders Edition, which costs more than all of those, runs a little bit warmer, runs a little bit worse in terms of out-of-the-box frame rates, but all of those cards can be overclocked to probably within, you know, maybe 10, 15 megahertz of each other. It's going to depend on, you know, how good you do with, I guess, the silicon lottery and how well your card can overclock. but every Pascal as well as touring card that I've tested, I've been able to do over 2 gigahertz very easily, so I would have no issues recommending any of these cards. I guess, like I said, go with the gaming OC if you don't want to do manual overclocking, if you like the aesthetics more, or you just want to save money, because it is cheaper than the Founders Edition after all. So if you want links to any of the cards that I mentioned, I'll have them down in the description below over to Amazon for you to check out. I do get a small kickback if you pick up anything over there, so that definitely helps me out a lot. Let me know your thoughts, though, down in the comments, what you thought of the video, the benchmarking, everything like that. Let me know what you want to see tested in the future, and I'll see what I can do for you guys. I'm going to get out of here now and enjoy the rest of my day. Maybe go play some more Red Dead Redemption 2. I will see you all tomorrow, though, for another video. Ta-ra now.